So now we come to stanza number 60 in the 9th chapter of Bodhicharyavatara, and now we went through some stanzas where we are talking about the self, and we're talking about going through the two selves, or true selflessness, and the first selflessness of the self, or this individual self, so I, me. So what is I? What is me? And many people think, those who are kind of more from the materialistic point of view, this is me, this is my body, what I can see, my body, my brain, that's me. So this we kind of went through, that if I search everywhere in my body, I can't find it. My body is so many. It's not one thing. It's so many things put together. They're just so interrelated, and it's so many interdependent thing. And in this, if you try to find something that is that we can say is me, there is nothing you can find. It's just, and everything is changing, everything is moving, everything is arising and disappearing of its own. Everything separately is arising and disappearing, something else coming, and it's changing all the time. So there is nothing called me, which is something existing on its own, independently in me, in my body. That we kind of discussed. Now, the people who think that, yes, the I or the self is not the body, but it is a consciousness, it's a mind. So there are, many different, of course, philosophical schools, philosophical philosophies, and different kind of concept and ideas about that. But in India, there used to be, there still are actually, certain philosophical schools which are very, very established and very, very strong philosophical schools, who say that I, or the self, exists on its own. In this, the most kind of important, most strong kind of philosophical school, one of them is Sankhya, and another is Vaisasika. And usually it is thought by the Buddhists that if you can argue with them or discuss with these two philosophical schools, and then it will they have old kind of they have lots of arguments for the existence of self, what in that philosophy, in those philosophies called Atma, you can say. So therefore, if you can convince them, or if you can, then you can. It helps to understand the idea of selflessness. The Sankhya philosophy, it's very complicated. It's very complicated. So if I try to, give a very, very clear understanding of their philosophy, I think I will not be able to do that properly. And if I make an attempt, it will make it too complicated also. And sometimes I've also seen that when the Buddhists present this philosophy, maybe it was that philosophy was like that at that time, but now they don't exactly say that. They don't exactly present it in this way. So my presentation of the Sankhya philosophy from the way the Buddhists presented will not be so correct, I think. So therefore I would make that attempt. So I will just try to explain what is what is in the text here. Generally, from the Sankhya philosophy, it's very complicated, so I don't want to. There's 25 main things that you have to understand and all these things, but there are, everything else is impermanent. There are only two things which are permanent, they say. One is the Atma, and another is what we call Tso. I don't know how to explain that, but anyway, the Atma is always is permanent, and Atma is actually a consciousness. Is a consciousness. So that's why the consciousness, the Atma, the awareness, the consciousness, that is the permanent. So now here, so this is stanza number 660. If the hearing consciousness is permanent, it follows that it's hearing all the time. And if there is no object, what does it cognize? On what ground do you call it consciousness? So now the Buddhists are asking, you say that, Atma is there, and Atma is permanent, it is always there, true. So what is Atma? So Atma is the awareness, the consciousness. So if awareness, the consciousness is Atma, then, we have the consciousness of seeing, we have the consciousness of, hearing, etc., etc., etc. So, if the consciousness of hearing, is it permanent or not? So then you have to say, yes, it is. Then, if the hearing consciousness is permanent, why don't we always hear? Because we don't hear anything unless there is a sound. So when there is no sound, then we don't hear. And when we don't hear, then how can there be hearing consciousness at that time? Now the idea is like this, from, the main thing is that there is consciousness and there is, a continuum of consciousness, and that continuum doesn't stop, the consciousness is always there. So from this kind of philosophical school's point of view, because it is continuously there, therefore it must be permanent. But from Buddhist point of view, the argument point of view, Buddhist point of view, if it is something is continuously there, does not mean that it has to be permanent. Because there can be one thing, then it can be another, then it can be another, then it can be another, And it changes so quickly that we think that it is permanently there, but it is not permanently there. It is not even continuously there. It is coming and going and coming and going. Like for instance, if you look at the bulb, of the light bulb, we can see that, from our point of view, it's constantly light. Light is shining constantly. And it's always, light is always there. That's what we think. But if we examine it closely, it's not like that. There always, there's light and then another light, and another light, and another light, and another light. So this light is not always there or permanently there. It's very, very quickly changing, but it's so quickly changing that it seems like it is always there. That's from the scientific point of view. So, if something is there, like consciousness, and it is there now, it is there for a long time, we think that it is one thing. It's always there, one thing. But actually, it's not that. It's changing. Like, for instance, from Buddhist point of view, I'm talking. When the eye, the ear, the right kind of the working ear organ, and a sound, and then the consciousness, the sound, the ear awareness, or the ear organ, or ear, what you call it, ear and the sound meets, the hearing consciousness arises. And at that same time, then eye meets an object, then seeing consciousness arises. It's two different consciousnesses actually at the same time, maybe, or just almost the same time, and not exactly same thing, but so all these different kind of consciousnesses can arise and can all kind of, then we can feel, and then we can sense, and we can, smell, and we can taste, and all kind of things happening, and this go on. Then we think that it's all one thing, but actually it's not one thing. It's changing all the time. It's momentary. It's like that. Because if something is totally permanent, and permanent means existing on its own, independently. When something is existing on its own, independently, then it cannot be affected by many other things or other things, and it cannot change. So therefore, it is very difficult to have something permanent, which keep on going, and which keep on manifesting, and which keep on, so therefore, logically, if something is truly permanent, then it has to be in one way and cannot be affected, because I can hear one sound now, and then if it is, if that is permanent, then I have to be hearing that sound all the time. It cannot be that I can hear another sound. If I say another sound, that means it's a new thing, new consciousness. So therefore, it has become changed. It is not the same consciousness of, of hearing this nice sound, not nice sound, or this sound of bird, to the sound of a voice of a human being, to the sound of nature or whatever. So therefore, it can't be. So this is what is saying. If the hearing consciousness is permanent, it follows that hearing all the time. It has to hear all the time. If there is no object, what does it recognize? Because sometimes we hear and sometimes we don't hear. So when we don't hear, does it mean that there is no consciousness at that time? Because there can't be any consciousness. One cannot hear all the time. So therefore, when there's no, so hearing is affected. Hearing is, depends on the sound. If there is no sound, there is no hearing. So therefore, hearing arises. The sense of hearing arises when there is the sound. If the sound is not there, there can't be hearing. So therefore, hearing is impermanent. Hearing is changing. But when there is, then what happens when there is no sound? You said, the sound is, the hearing, the consciousness is continuously there. It's just that there happened to be no sound at that time. Then how can there be consciousness without being conscious? On what ground do you call it consciousness? Because there's no consciousness at that time. There's no consciousness of hearing. And when the consciousness of hearing is not there, how can you say that the consciousness is always there? If something that is unconscious knows, it follows that the sick has knowledge also. Then it says that if something that is unconscious, because there is no sound, so therefore the hearing consciousness is not there, but still you say that there is that consciousness called Atma, even while it is unconscious. Then if something it's unconscious could be also conscious, then everything can be conscious. It follows that a stick has knowledge also. A stick also knows. A stick is also knows because stick is unconscious at the moment, but it is there. So, what is this difference between the stick and the consciousness? Therefore, in the absence of a thing to know, it's clear that consciousness will not arise. So the consciousness has to have an object of consciousness. So therefore, and this consciousness arises, and then another consciousness arises, and then another consciousness arises. So its consciousness is impermanent. Different things happening all the time, and consciousness, there is a continuum of consciousness, but that doesn't mean that it is permanent. That's what the Buddhist way of thinking is. So I think I'll just leave here, and before that I will recite the Tibetan version of this I think 2 stanzas. Kate dai hi tona tamche tsena danzin jurs. Heja mena jirini gongi hipa hi jusi. Kate hime hina hiyu hipa tawanja. Tena heja nipa mepa hipa mechi ngi. So these 2 stanzas, 61, 60 and 61. So I stop here. Thank you very much.